Hi, and welcome to the second in our series of In Conversations With. Today I have got Rachael Ferry-Jones with me, and we will be discussing the infrastructure programme in PAS. I don't want to be too specific because we might wander off topic. If you want to go back and look at our first in the series, that was on localised planning fees, they will all be on our website. So welcome. So starting up then, Rachael, can you explain a little bit about yourself and your role?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Anna, and thanks for inviting me onto this series. It's really exciting to be able to come and talk about infrastructure. So I'm Rachael. I'm a principal consultant at the Planning Advisory Service, PAS, and I've been with PAS since early 2018. And during that time, my main focus at PAS has been on supporting councils with developer contributions, so that's Section 106 agreements and the Community Infrastructure Levy, or SIL. But also infrastructure delivery and planning. But of course at PAS we also get involved in other areas of support. So I've spent the last few years in particular working on local plans, more recently strategic planning, and I was lucky enough a few years ago to lead on our Return to Planning programme, which was a really important programme for the sector at a point in time. Just before I joined PAS, I was in local government. I worked for Westminster City Council for about 18 years, where I started in development management and moved on to working on some really exciting projects. And I talk about them here because there was a real infrastructure focus. One of the main regeneration projects I got to work on for many years was the redevelopment around Paddington Basin. And it's really thinking about it now. I mean, that was infrastructure led from the very beginning. And I worked for, I learned from some of the best. If you think about it, at the time, it was during the noughties, and Heathrow Express had just arrived. You had a listed, very important station that needed redeveloping. We were planning for Crossrail, not only Crossrail stations, but for the boring works that were going through Westminster in close proximity to London Underground. Major hospital that needed redeveloping. And in amongst this, rediverting highways works, rebuilding a bridge, they found an original Isambard Kingdom Brunel bridge. So it was incredible. But I think what I learned was, well, infrastructure is key to unlocking particularly brownfield, canal side, previous industrial land for mixed use. Absolutely, but also the fact that we needed to step outside of the traditional planning role to enable that infrastructure coordination to happen.
Brilliant. Yeah, nice context there. Because now we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of, I suppose, why governance? Because we've been working on governance for a few years now, but how did we get there? And what does it mean in the current system or the emerging system?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because when I started with PAS, the focus was very much on helping councils set up their SIL, or looking at Section 106 and how that was operating. And obviously it was at a time where there was lots of legislative changes. We all know that SIL's had its fair few amendments and changes to regulations. So it was helping councils with that process. But I think from my own experience of working on SIL and the mayoral SIL in London, and also from colleagues across the country, that we started to realise that the hardest part was actually, how are we going to spend this money? How are we going to get the right processes in place? How are we going to work across our organisations to ensure that these are tools being used for their purpose, which is funding infrastructure to support development? And of course, there is no guidelines, there's no mandate on how authorities govern themselves. There are restrictions. It must be spent on infrastructure that supports development of the area. But beyond that, councils, need to make up those governance processes and decisions themselves. And it's tricky. I think as well, we were starting to see lots of publicity about unspent monies of both Section 106 and SIL. We were also recognising quite difficult challenges where you've perhaps got two-tier authorities, particularly I think a major issue for some areas. District councils collect SIL, for example, or they're collecting the planning obligations through Section 106, but it's often county that are delivering some quite important infrastructure like education. So those, it can be difficult to join up. You're working in different organisations. We were also seeing things like with Section 106, because by nature of it, you are negotiating obligations alongside policy requirements, but you're negotiating them whilst the planning application's being considered. Actually, that scheme might not be implemented for a number of years. And by the time the trigger for whether it's infrastructure in kind as part of the site is being delivered or money, because 106 agreements are quite rigid by their nature in setting out what those monies should be spent on or what infrastructure should be delivered, often you'd find that infrastructure wasn't required or that the infrastructure needed to change. So we wanted to, with all this together, we sort of started to think about, where we need to be helping councils is actually setting up their governance processes. So we worked with an organisation called Inner Circle, and we've now worked with, I think it's coming up to about 70 authorities. Some of those
being really, isn't it?
Yeah. Some of them being joint authorities as well.
Yeah.
And what we essentially do is, we've got tools on the website. So you've got a self health check of governance processes. But with those councils, we've done facilitated support. So we go in, we kind of look between the end-to-end system. So point an obligation or SIL monies are received to the point of delivery of that infrastructure, and the systems and processes in between, and also what leadership is in place, what governance arrangements. And I think importantly, and learning from this programme, but also from the local plan support, evidence. So looking at infrastructure delivery plans. And what we soon learned was those authorities, there's a strong link between those authorities that are using IDPs as live tools. So they're updating them regularly. With good governance and spend of their developer contributions on infrastructure. So our latest, we've kind of moved the governance work on a little bit, and we're in the process of about to publish some guidance and tools on developing infrastructure delivery plans, IDPs.
Brilliant. And so in terms of, like, I suppose the current system, you and I have had conversations, haven't we, about, strategic planning and infrastructure are really best buds. That's what they do, that they work together. So you set the spatial framework, the infrastructure go together, and one doesn't really work without each other. So in terms of I suppose where we go next in terms of planning reform, that's probably a marker, isn't it? Don't want you to comment at length, but it probably is a marker for us, isn't it, in terms of where we go next?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's real opportunity here in terms of strategic planning. Yeah,
brilliant, thank you. So when you're working with councils, and you can talk from your own experience or from the programme, that's absolutely fine. So can you outline the challenges of planning for infrastructure from a local government perspective, and some of the benefits of this new strategic approach? So just talk us through that. You know so much more than I ever will about this.
I think that there are real challenges at whatever scale you're working at, but real challenges. I think one things we hear a lot is the misalignment of planning and programs. So when you're working with infrastructure providers, because we're doing a local plan in a certain time scale and require information at certain points, doesn't necessarily align with the planning that the infrastructure provider is undertaking. So we hear it often when it comes to things like utility providers and their cycles of programming when they're looking at their needs and demands, or NHS where they're looking at their estates managements or requirements. And I think, you know, we need a more of a deliberate rhythm in how we work with these authorities. It's more of, these providers. It needs to be a conversation rather than, someone said to me the other day a phrase, one and done. I've not heard that before, but I really like it. It's and I think, if I'm honest, when it comes to local plans, we seek to engage at the point that it works for the local plan without necessarily always thinking about the point it works for the infrastructure provider. And also, where we've got local plan delays, there is a question of, you know, how does an infrastructure provider know what benefit are they going to get from engaging in the local plan system? What return are they going to have? So if we had more of a conversation where we met and engaged with infrastructure providers at certain periods of the year, we shared data in the same format, we shared our understandings. Those authorities we see where they're doing this, it works really well. They understand what those infrastructure needs are and they understand it more regularly. And you asked me how strategic planning might So I think, you know, for some of those providers, like utilities and water, they work at a larger scale, and working with lots of local authorities on individual local plans, all operating at different timescales, is hard. And actually, there's that role at a strategic level to be that convener, to be that role in helping those providers to work at a more regional scale and almost work on behalf of the local authorities as well. And I think, you know, we all know infrastructure doesn't stop at administrative boundaries. It has impact far and wide, and actually just working across those boundaries, it also gives more opportunity for funding opportunities by working together. And I think lastly, Anna, on this point, you know, we're seeing movement as well. It's really exciting that we've got, and I'll get the acronym right, the National Infrastructure and Service Transformation Authority, NISTA. So they were launched earlier this year. They've already published a 10-year strategy, and they've got a pipeline of projects. Obviously, it's a new organisation. We're early days, but this is feels like quite a new and exciting approach. And over time, I'm sure that as we develop strategic development strategies, they will feed into this. There's probably the opportunity for that pipeline to be influenced by a strategic approach. And I know NISTA are very keen to work and support strategic development strategies come forward.
I mean, I was just, as you were talking, I was thinking, because infrastructure comes in two buckets in local planning authorities. So it's infrastructure planning seems quite separate to infrastructure as a constraint. And, you know, we've got well recorded, haven't we? Water's the problem, road capacity is the problem. Actually, infrastructure planning should be both, shouldn't it? It should be about, you know, making sure there's enough capacity and also the provision of new. I think that's what we would see as best practice.
Absolutely.
So in strategic planning conversations at the moment, there is so much conversation about what infrastructure is strategic and which infrastructure is local. Are you hearing that too?
Yeah, we're hearing it a lot. And in conversations, you know, we're trying to work with some authorities, future strategic authorities, looking at infrastructure. And it's a big issue. But the more I think about it, Anna, you know, the more we're working with authorities, it's like, is that actually the right question? And, you know, are we trying to replicate what we do at a local level, at a strategic level? Or is the should the better question be, you know, what's within the gift, for example, of a strategic development strategy? What's within its influence and power to deliver if we tried to lock down by definition what sits in an SDS and what sits in a local plan, I don't think that would ever work. I mean, going back to Paddington, those projects, you've got Paddington Station, Crossrail, they have major strategic impact, but a lot of the delivery and the convening was actually at a more local level.
Yeah.
And so where do you draw the line? And perhaps it's more about what are these new agencies, these new strategies, these new powers able to deliver? And like we talked about a moment ago, perhaps it is that convening power, an ability to bring together, to look across borders, to look at joint funding, rather than that belongs there and that belongs there.
So we might be talking more about roles of the various authorities rather than types of infrastructure. There's different roles, aren't there? Yeah, I'd probably agree with that from what I've heard. And so is there a wider role for strategic authorities in ensuring the delivery of infrastructure? And I use my words carefully there because, you know, who's responsible for delivery? And how might they do that?
Yeah, so I think it goes back to the point of, you know, where we're thinking about those type of infrastructure providers that work better at that more strategic level. So we're hearing all the time at the moment about water shortages, the need for more reservoirs, the ability for strategic authorities to work at that level or to work with utilities. We've got colleagues who are doing a lot of work on national strategic infrastructure projects, NSEPs, and working with like DESNES and the new regional energy spatial strategies. I may have got my acronyms wrong there, but hopefully they're right. You know, these will be important functions for strategic authorities to work with those organisations. We need the power for future development to connect to. So working at that regional scale, and obviously strategic authorities will have a role in where those growth corridors are. So understanding that. And I think we can't forget, I know London's not always the right example to look at across the country, but we have got 20 years experience of the Greater London Authority. They, you know, have had a massive impact over the years on coordinating infrastructure delivery. They've used their powers to charge a mayoral CIL to help deliver Crossrail, a strategic piece of infrastructure. And I think as well, going back to, you talked about local government reorganisation earlier, and it is a real opportunity. I think, you know, I also talked about the two-tier challenges at times, actually having more unitary authorities who have under one roof some of the services, that delivery of infrastructure, and being able to link up the role of an authority, which, if we think about it, like you said, really important role for understanding infrastructure need, but infrastructure planning as consultee on projects like NSEPs, as decision maker on infrastructure projects that come in as a planning application, as funder through developer contributions or other capital programs, and ultimately delivery, because we'll have so many infrastructure services under one roof.
Yeah, and actually in the current system, you know, I suppose it's worth acknowledging, isn't it? There are two-tier systems that work really well, and they work as if they were one body almost in the planning senses, and there's others that don't. And I think that, and I suppose your experience that you shared at the beginning was that the people who plan infrastructure well are usually also the people who are planning well in terms of their local plan and those sorts of documents and policies. So yeah, who knows what's going to happen with local government reorganisation? We're not allowed to guess about that. So moving from the vast and strategic, so we're going to go from big to really small, to the local funding of infrastructure. So we're back to CIL and Section 106, which is what most local authorities know and love, you know. So how do they fit into that picture now? So we've got the infrastructure delivery plan and that strategic plan. So locally still have SIL in Section 106?
Yeah, absolutely. After a period of sort of a few years of uncertainty on
Yeah.
where those tools might
Yeah.
go,
Yeah.
we certainly have certainty now that
Yeah.
government are committed to Section 106 and SIL and making the tools work, making them
Yeah.
more usable where we can, and making them work as they should. So I should give a little bit more explanation
Yeah.
maybe around for anyone who aren't planners, because we like to talk in acronyms
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
all.
We assume everybody knows, don't we? But why don't we go into what is the difference? Yeah.
Yeah, so Section 106 planning obligations, they're secured by a legal agreement linked to a planning application. So they are very much focused on what's happening at a site level. They often deal with mitigation, but they also deal with securing policy requirements. So you will secure affordable housing in residential development through a Section 106 planning obligation. So they are very, very specific to the application. And,
They don't have to be financial either, do they? So
no,
that's an important difference, I think. Yeah. So I suppose it's a Section 106 isn't about money, it's about conditions, isn't it?
absolutely. I think that's a
Yeah.
good way of defining it. So, yeah, you would, for example, on a major site, you may have a school delivered
Yeah.
through Section 106, your affordable housing delivered, and there are legal tests. So you can't just put
Yeah.
anything in agreement. There are legal tests. It must be related to that development.
Yeah.
Still, on the other hand, far more flexible tool. It's a set rate, operates a little bit like a tax, if I'm allowed to say that,
Yeah.
but across development, it captures more developments typically than what a Section 106 agreement would. And it's really there to deal with the cumulative impact of development across an area. And unlike Section 106, you can pool it across your area. So it's much more flexible. You are required to spend it on infrastructure to support development in the area. You can spend it outside of the local authority area if it supports development in that authority. And with the exception of neighbourhood SIL, where it's a little bit different, yeah, you can spend it anywhere. So it's not within your authority, it's not directly related to the site where it's accrued from. So a much more flexible tool. And then you have mayoral SIL that I've talked about that only operates at the moment in London. But as we see the planning and infrastructure bill come through, more strategic development strategies come through, we're likely to see mayoral SILs across the country.
But there'll still be a role for Section 106, won't there? Because that will be individual and site related. So I think where people tend to get confused between the two is in thinking it's one or the other.
Yeah.
And where you have a SIL, you will also have Section 106 agreements. So it's worth just trying to get your head around that. And probably now isn't the time to go into great detail about that, but I would, particularly for members who are sitting on committee for the first time, would really suggest that they sit down with, with the officer dealing with developer contributions to understand how it works in their area, because
Yeah.
it's not as easy to understand as some things, is it?
I think that's absolutely right. And I might give a quick example of where,
Yeah.
particularly, a few years ago, government lifted pooling restrictions. There are no pooling restrictions on Section 106 obligations anymore. But let's do a very quick example, one we like to use. You've got a major development site. You require the mitigation, is to require a school or, land for a school. You may well cross-fund that school. Like you might ask for land and structure and use SIL to fit out. Like they are complementary tools because it's not only going to be children from that development necessarily using that school. You may have children coming from the wider area. So really good point, Anna, and just a good way of explaining how they can be complementary.
Yeah, and they do work hand in hand actually, which is good. Um, and so what are we trying what we are trying to get to, I suppose, is having the conversations at the most sensible geographies. I talk about this a lot because I think that it would it's not about saying a strategic authority is better. It's about saying it is better at doing this. And in infrastructure terms, it has a better fitting geography, doesn't it, to
Yeah.
most of the providers? I think that's it. You know, and my question that I would pose is there a risk that planning gets in the way of practical application? You know, or does planning reform actually hold the answers to making infrastructure delivery easier?
Yeah, and I think this may come back to sort of how it's done and the work that we're about to publish,
Yeah,
because I think traditionally, for example, infrastructure delivery plans at a local plan level, they've been done at a point in time to be used as evidence to support a local plan
yeah,
through examination. They've then been put on a shelf and not necessarily looked at again. So when you're a few years down the line, and we all know infrastructure requirements
yeah,
change, your IDP is not much use to
no,
helping you make the decisions on either what development should deliver in kind or what you should be spending your
yeah,
developer contributions on. But done right, so that's where planning can be, that it can cause problems and hinder.
yeah,
But done right, and those authorities where we see it done well, where they keep their IDPs
yeah,
up to date on, say, an annual basis,
yeah,
they share mapping, they work across teams within the authority. Planning is a real enabler. I
yeah,
mean, having a live IDP where you have a major application come in or even a windfall application and you understand what the area infrastructure needs are because you've had more recent
yeah,
conversations and you've perhaps got a governance process where your organisation is always also supporting a prioritisation process.
yeah,
It supports decision making as well as future decisions on developer contribution funding.
yeah. And
So
where do
it
you
has,
suggest
sorry.
members get involved in that, Rachel? Because in terms of that prioritising, quite often in councils, it's members will say to us that they're not involved in those decisions, but there is a role for that, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, a real mixed bag across the
Yeah,
country, actually, in terms of member
yeah,
involvement. But we see, and some of our guidance on the governance is about setting up the right senior
yeah,
leadership boards, whether it's boards or decision makers, sounding boards, but having that um, cross representation in decision making and going
yeah,
forward. So yeah, a real key part for members and also for lead members to help explain it to other
yeah.
councillors within the organisation.
And so planning reform then, what does it offer in that space then? So what's the new menu of the stuff coming forwards that helps in this space?
Yeah, so there's nothing specific to sort of the IDPs at the moment
Yeah,
or developer contributions, but obviously we're working in that broader
mm,
space. I think I've spoken to several people. I've spoken to different organisations actually. That
yeah,
opportunity, if we're in a rhythm of more frequent updates to plans,
yeah,
once we're in the new plan making system, because new plan making system, you're effectively starting on the next one whilst you're already in the middle
yeah,
of the new one. The fact it's hopefully going to make keeping evidence up
yeah,
to date, like infrastructure delivery plans, um, much more manageable. I
yeah,
think the greater look at use of data. We've been doing a bit of work on IDPs around data standardization and how we can streamline because speaking the same language when you're sharing data amongst
yeah,
organizations is really important. So I think there's a role in planning reform there. Um, Also in how we produce that evidence. So actually our guidance coming out is probably, we've got one
Yeah.
eye on the new system. So it's an approach that's trying to fit in to that
Yeah.
faster pace of plan making. So I think it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to
Yeah.
keep those conversations going.
Yeah. Okay. So what what would we advise now? So councils are either in the existing planning system, plan making, or waiting for the new system, plan making. They're looking at their, development management processes and expecting changes in committees. What do they do about the infrastructure planning?
Yeah, this is really important.
Mhm.
I think I'll start with the fact that we're all working to the government mandate of delivery of 1.5 million homes. We know that the biggest issues for objecting to development is infrastructure,
Yeah.
whether that be access to GP surgeries or safe highways. It's principally infrastructure led. I think I would ask councils to raise this profile
Yeah.
of this area of work and to resource it. I think I mentioned earlier about those different roles of the authority
Yeah.
of a council. It doesn't just sit with land use planning. This sits as a responsibility across the organisation. So how do you set up those governance processes in amongst what I know is a busy and challenging, but this area doesn't just sit with the planning service. It can't just sit with the planning service to be delivered. More practically, I would say, of course I'd say this, but update your infrastructure delivery plan, treat it like a working tool, embed that into your local plan reviews and
Yeah.
systems where you want that to sit and the monitoring. I think always think about delivery.
Yeah.
We can get so focused on the process that we and because we have to, because there's a
Yeah.
process to follow, but we can so often not forget, but lose sight of what it is that we're actually trying to deliver, and that's the ultimate goal. So that IDP informing a process for you to actually prioritize infrastructure. We all know, I mean, let's be realistic, there will never be enough money through development to fund all the infrastructure required.
Yeah.
There will be difficult decisions to make, but we have to make those decisions to support that development coming forward. I'd also say authorities, I mentioned earlier, getting in that rhythm of building relationships and conversations with infrastructure providers, and you do that through making sure you've got the resource to
Yeah.
do that, clarifying the governance. And probably, I would say, for those authorities, there are 52% of authorities currently charging a SIL.
Yeah.
If you're not charging a SIL, we've got some stability. I
Hmm.
would urge authorities to go back and have a look at the opportunities for charging a SIL.
Yeah.
Whether you're in the process of updating your local plan, you will have viability evidence there that you're working on. Think about, how would it work if we did operate a SIL across the authority? If you've recently adopted, use your evidence from your local plan to start thinking about, could we bring forward a SIL? Even low-level SILs in areas, have the ability to generate a pot of money for infrastructure that is arguably more than would have been received through Section
Yeah.
106. So it's a real opportunity. And for those authorities who do charge SIL, perhaps an opportunity to revisit whether you need to look at your charging schedule.
Yeah.
And I guess the other thing, Anna, just lastly, is if we are going to see more mayoral SILs across the country, it is the opportune time at a local level
Yeah.
for you to be thinking about your own SIL, potentially before a mayoral SIL comes in.
Yeah. And what's the geographic spread of SIL then, Rach? Do you
Oh,
know?
oh, how about I put a map on the
Yeah.
website?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just, because, you know, you almost think that it would probably be quite south bias just because of viability, because you know, years gone
Yeah,
by we were all talking it was the viability that knocked out the argument for Sill, wasn't it, in various places, um, and that might just be quite a nice thing to have alongside this discussion for people, just so
yeah.
that they can see how that sits at the moment. So yeah, is there anything you'd like to add? Do you think we've missed anything?
Uh, just probably that point about embracing collaboration,
Yeah,
getting around the table, and and realizing for this to work, we do need to step outside sometimes of the strict planning
yeah.
functions. And it's how we work across organisations, across our own organisation as well as others, to enable that to happen.
Yeah. And so, as always, our website is a really good resource for all sorts of interesting and useful tools and notes that you can get more information on. Rachel runs the programme, so do get in touch with her if you would like to know a bit more. And thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thanks, Anna.
Thank you.